If we look at the various writing systems of the world, we will find thousands of years of messy evolution, mistranslations, and transcription errors from when the scribes just couldn't read all that well. That's how we went from Egyptian hieroglyphs 5,000 years ago to the Latin script we all know and love. But what if I told you that there's an alphabet out there that didn't evolve messily, but was rather quite deliberately engineered from scratch to be linguistically perfect? Yes, my friends, today we're heading to Korea to explore Hangul, the script that we here at SideQuest consider to be the best writing system known to man. To the untrained eye, the Korean alphabet might appear similar to Chinese, so one might assume that it evolved from it over the centuries. That is indeed what happened with Japanese. Around the 5th century, they took the Chinese writing system, called Hanzi, and adapted it into the kanji that we know today. But that is not what happened with Korea, or at least not its current alphabet. The Koreans had tried to use the Chinese script, creating what is known as Hanja around the 4th century, but this was at least somewhat done at sword point. Lest we forget, Han China occupied the northern part of the Korean peninsula for nearly 5 centuries, so the Koreans had plenty of time to study their writing system. But the Koreans quickly ran into problems with Hanja. You see, the Korean language is fundamentally different from Chinese, with grammar and sounds that are entirely incompatible. It would be a bit like trying to write English using Egyptian hieroglyphs. You could theoretically do it, but it would not be a pleasant experience. However, since Chinese was the only script in town, the Koreans would use the clunky Hanja system to write their language for the next 1,000 years. Every Korean scholar, nobleman, and bureaucrat would have to first learn Chinese with its thousands of characters, and then also learn how to read Korean in the Chinese script. The result was one of the lowest literacy rates in the world, where only the very top of Korean society, the aristocratic scholar class known as the Yangban, could read and write. And the Yangban liked it that way, as their literacy was a prized possession that gave them a total monopoly on power across the government, military, and religion. So even by the 15th century, when contemporary states were pushing above 5% literacy among their general population, Korea was perpetually stuck at 2% through no fault of its own. This would hardly be a concern for most medieval monarchs, but the Koreans were lucky enough to have a ruler who was what we would today call an absolute nerd. King Sejong of Chosun is undoubtedly Korea's wisest king, having spent his entire life in scholarly study across all branches of knowledge. He founded Korea's Royal Research Institute, through which he and his followers made great breakthroughs and reforms in everything from astronomy and medicine to music and agriculture. It was a set of very unique circumstances that allowed the wise King Sejong to reform Korean society so rapidly. His father and grandfather had jointly overthrown Korea's previous ruling dynasty, Goryeo, from where the country gets its name. And in the process of doing so, they had murdered a big chunk of Korea's aristocratic Yangban so that no one would dare threaten their rule. So, King Sejong inherited a very stable country with minimal political opposition, allowing him to indulge in his scholarly pursuits unhindered. Yet, despite his absolute power, the king was humble and cared deeply for his people. That's why he wrote an agricultural manual for them, as the ones they had from China weren't suitable for Korea's climate. He even built what we might call a printing press, 2 decades before Gutenberg, to get the manual in the hands of as many farmers as possible. Yet King Sejong knew that the vast majority of his loyal subjects had no way to read his manual. He was also keenly aware of the great injustices they suffered at the hands of the literate Yangbang, who frequently abused their knowledge of the law. And so, sometime around 1440, King Sejong embarked on a grand scholarly quest to invent a new writing system for the Korean language. Rather than following the Chinese approach, where every symbol represents a full word or concept, he chose to create an alphabet of just 28 letters that represent sounds. To make his new Hangul alphabet easier to learn, he designed the consonants to visually represent what your mouth should do to make that sound, like small anatomical diagrams. For example, the letter representing N is shaped like a tongue touching the roof of the mouth, while the letter for M is shaped like closed lips. As for the vowels, he based their designs on the fundamental trinity of Confucian philosophy: a dot representing heaven, a horizontal line representing earth, and a vertical line representing man. Out of these three building blocks, Sejong designed Hangul's vowels to carry special meaning. The lighter vowels were positive, facing up or right towards heaven, while the deeper ones were negative, facing down or left towards earth. The reason most people think Hangul isn't alphabetic, but logographic like Chinese, is because the letters aren't written out one by one, like in our familiar Latin scripts, but are rather grouped into syllable blocks. Each block is made up of a consonant, a vowel, and an optional second consonant, so it's still easy to read, but it maintains the visual prestige of Chinese characters. Then you just string these blocks together, originally vertically, but nowadays horizontally, and boom, you're writing Korean. It was a brilliant and simple system, designed to be learned in less than a week compared to the years needed for Hanja. What's even more brilliant is that you can learn Korean quickly and easily thanks to our dear friends over at LingoPie. I've been absolutely obsessed with Korean dramas lately, and not just the big hits. I'm talking about the shows that don't make it to Netflix. With LingoPie, I've been able to watch the best Korean content and learn Korean at the same time. Gone are the days of boring textbooks or guilt-tripping owl notifications. LingoPie has interactive subtitles with instant translations and grammar explanations when you click on them. And everything gets automatically saved to flashcards so you can review later. When the dialogue gets too fast, you can slow it down or loop specific lines until it clicks, so I'm finally understanding the jokes and references that make Korean shows so awesome. LingoPie also works for 12 other languages too, but for Korean specifically, it is exactly what you need. And as a special courtesy to SideQuest viewers, you can get a 7-day free trial and over 55% off of their annual subscription if you click on the link below. Now, unfortunately for King Sejong, he couldn't rely on LingoPie to popularize his new alphabet. So, he revealed Hangul to his royal court in 1443, but the reception was less than stellar. The aristocratic Yangban firmly opposed it, as did many of the scholars in the Royal Research Institute he had founded, mocking Hangul as a script for women or fools. In 1444, they banded together to write an official petition against Hangul. They argued that only barbarian nations like the Mongols and the Manchus had their own scripts, while all civilized Confucian nations used Chinese characters. When the Chinese learned about Hangul, they would see it as betrayal and would label all Koreans as barbarians, perhaps even invading Korea to subjugate it. Now, while going to war over an alphabet might seem extreme, Ming China had already set a precedent by invading Vietnam a few decades earlier, supposedly to restore Confucian values, so Korea's scholars were right to be afraid. But of course, the real reason the Yangban opposed Hangul was to maintain their power. If the common people learned how to read, they would realize that they had been getting fleeced for centuries. King Sejong, however, was not an easy man to debate, and through his intellectual superiority, he stripped his opponents of all their arguments. When they continued to persist, he threw them into prison for a single day as a thinly veiled threat of what his father had done to his enemies just a few decades prior. The king and his loyal, scholarly followers then compiled a manual for Hangul, completing it in 1446 and publishing it as widely as possible. But unfortunately, King Sejong was a lifelong sufferer of diabetes, and he passed away from poor health just 4 years later. His son and heir was similarly frail and died within 2 years, leaving an 11-year-old boy on the Korean throne. So before long, the Yangban had regained their power. They fought against Hangul for the next 50 years, finally leading to its ban in 1504. For the next 4 centuries, Hangul was relegated to the fringes of Korean society, kept alive in private by literate women and Buddhist monks. It was only towards the end of the 19th century, when Japan grew increasingly domineering towards Korea, that Koreans rallied to Hangul as a means to preserve their national identity. Hangul was made Korea's official script in 1894. But less than a decade later, Japan occupied and annexed Korea, spending the next 30 years systematically trying to destroy Korean identity and Hangul. Yet through the brave efforts of Korean scholars and resistance fighters, Hangul survived the Japanese occupation and remains the official script of both North and South Korea. Both Koreas have their own national holidays celebrating Hangul, on different dates of course, and linguists around the globe routinely drool over Hangul, praising it as the best writing system on Earth. In any case, my friends, if you enjoyed our brief linguistic walk through Korean history, consider supporting us on Patreon. Let us know what other historical curiosities you'd like us to cover, and stay tuned for the next linguistically logical episode of SideQuest. Why are Koreans such great architects? They always know their angles.